Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because we have partners from all over the world joining us tonight. I want to welcome you to a very special CLIA webinar that we are featuring a CEO discussion with both Darr and Harry Sommer. We're very excited about this. This is the first of its kind. I'm Karen Grunberg. Many of you know me. I'm the SVP of membership, and I get to facilitate today's call. I'm very excited to do that. So I want to thank both Harry and Bud for joining us this morning. The structure of the call is such that it will be a 1-hour discussion, then will be followed by Q&A. And I want to welcome everybody who is joining us today, which includes our cruise line members, our Diamond and Diamond Elite partners, and our Premier Agency members from North America. Just a couple of pieces of information for you. Please make sure you've muted the mic up in the right corner of our Teams call. And also on the screen, there is a camera button if you would like to be seen, and also a chat button. So in the chat button, if you could type in your name, your company, and the city you're in based would be really great. Also, throughout the day, you could use the chat button for some questions for later on. And we will hold all questions and comments to the end. You can also raise your hand for questions, but it's sometimes easier to put them in the chat. So this webinar is being recorded for future distribution on the CLIA channels. So I'm going to thank you all for joining us. We're really excited about this, and I'm going to turn this over to Darr. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Karen. And what a pleasure to be here for not only this first of what I hope is many of these webinars, but also this neighborhood has fond memories for me, because it was back in December in an adjoining conference room where I was given the opportunity to come join CLIA for Bud 2.0 as CEO. And Harry was one of the people that was kind enough to put his confidence in me and has continued to do that as a member of the Global Executive Committee. So Harry, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, but it was a pleasure to host you then, and it's an even greater pleasure to host you today in our offices. I'm very much looking forward to chatting with you, talking to all the important members on the call today, and everyone else who's listening in.
Great. Well, thanks, Harry. You're currently serving as not only the chairman or not only the CEO of Norwegian Cruise Lines Holding as a group, but also you're acting as brand president. I know you've got a lot going on all the time, but that's where you are now. Tell us a little bit about where did you begin? Where did you grow up, and where was your interest generated in the cruise industry?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I could probably talk about the whole hour about that, but I'll try not to. I'll try to do this in 3 to 5 minutes. And I was remiss when you introduced me before to not let everyone know what a great job you're doing as our CEO of CLIA. It's been a spectacular 8-9 months, however long it's been now, and we're very happy that you're leading this organization and really doing great things. And we're very enthusiastic about what's coming on in 2026 as well, as we start talking about the future. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. It's really kind of you to say that. I have to say, any credit I get is really a reflection of an amazing staff that I've got working around the world. And it's my pleasure to lead them, but they're the ones doing the work, just as the cruise lines are the ones doing the work in the industry. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. We would be nothing without the 40,000 team members we have throughout the world, trying to produce extraordinary experiences for our guests. Okay, so now to go back to your question. So I grew up in the Bronx in the 70s, and those of you who are familiar with New York history, may remember that was a bad period in New York. The city had gone bankrupt. The state had taken over the finances. There was austerity measures all around. And I had a passion for being an architect, and I wanted to design buildings and highways and do great things for people. But living in New York in the 70s, nothing was being built. So if you live in New York, like you're highly focused on New York, you don't see the rest of the world. So I quickly decided that wasn't in the cards for me. And I remember when I was thinking as a teenager what I wanted to do for a living, my dad, who was a very practical man, he grew up very poor. So, he was really focused on trying for me to find a profession where I could make a living. He challenged me and said, you should become an accountant, because if you're an accountant, you can do anything. And I'll tell you, I didn't enjoy being an accountant. I did it for a few years, but the foundation it provided in order to understand, the fundamentals of the business and what our operating model is really has helped me. So I thank my dad for that encouragement. I got married pretty young. I was 21, found the love of my life, and we're still together. I guess this is now close to 37 years later, or now it is 37 years later. I don't want to get that wrong in case she's listening. And she also grew up in New York, but wasn't really a big fan of living there. Again, not the best times, even in the late 80s, to live in New York, not what it is today. Didn't really like winters, didn't really see us having a family there. And she wanted to move to Florida. So I came down to Florida maybe 2 years into our marriage. I think it was in late 91. And I started looking for jobs. And this was before Indeed and the internet and, all the tools that people use today to get employment. And I basically just sent out a resume and a cover letter to every company that looked like it might need an accountant who was aspiring to be something else but an accountant. And of course, even back then, as it is today, in South Florida, one of the 2 or 3 major industries is cruising. And I lucked into getting a job for a startup at the time, which was Renaissance Cruises. And I started working there in June 1992 for Ed Redner. And then Frank Del Rio joined that company about a year later, and I worked for Frank and been working for Frank on and off since then, until obviously his recent retirement when I took over as being CEO of this company.
Wow, what an interesting path. So those that are Seinfeld friends will, of course, remember that George Costanza always dreamed of pretending he was an architect.
That's right.
I also, I went to school at Kings Point, right across Straug's Neck from the Bronx, and I belonged to a sailing club in the Bronx for many, many years in City Island. But I remember a New York Magazine cover that kind of described
that's right. Everything is the center of the world, and everything goes around. And when you live in New York, that's the way you think.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? How you never know which doors are going to open, but if you're open-minded about it, they can be really rewarding behind.
I also am a deeply religious man, and I believe that God has a plan for all of us. And I won't turn this into a religious seminar, I promise. But I look back through all of life's decisions and how I got to where I got to, and I've been put in the right place at the right time.
Well, we're glad to have you in this position, and even though you're wearing multiple hats at the moment, which I'm sure is a little more taxing than usual, you've laid out a charting the course plan for Norwegian, and Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings since the merger has certainly been nowhere near short on creativity and innovation. What sort of things can we expect from that charting the course strategy that you've laid out, and how do you think the guests on our ships in, say, 2030 might see some evolution, not just with your company, but overall?
So a couple of questions there, and I'll try to get through all of them. That's very good.
You can object. It's a compound question, Your Honor.
That's okay. We're friends here. No objections. So I'll start out with our philosophy behind charting the course, because charting the course, to some extent, our financial targets we set for the market. But before we set the financial targets, we try to set what our business strategy should be. And we got great minds in the company together. We had a little help from some outside consultants who were helpful in putting this together. But the core mission of this company is to deliver extraordinary vacations to our guests, right? And we move about 2.5 million guests a year, and we live day in and day out about what can we do to deliver extraordinary vacations. Now, of course, it has to be underlined with financial discipline, but we don't find those things to be adverse to each other. If you listen to our guests and hear what's the most important things to them, we can invest our resources in those things and not invest our resources in things that aren't important. And it's not, I'm not trying to compare where we are today versus where we were a few years ago, but I think we are taking a much more data-driven approach to listening to our guests. The internal mantra here is in any given week, we have somewhere between 55 to 57,000 guests on our ships, on our vessels around the world. We have 34 ships visiting 700 ports around the world. They tell us what they like and what they don't like. They fill out guest satisfaction forms. They write into us, overwhelmingly positive. But even in the positive comments, there's learning. What do we do to make the food a little bit better? What do we do to make the entertainment a little bit better? What do we do to make the activities a little bit better? the cleanest sheets of paper that we have to do this, and maybe this is where I get to live my architect dreams out, is when we design new ships. So, we've come out now with new platforms for the Oceania and Regent brand. The Oceania has the Sonata class, and the Regent has Prestige. They're coming out in 27 and 26 respectively. I did those in reverse, where we really got to start with a clean sheet of paper and design a ship with the guest at the center of the experience. So each of these ships wound up being slightly bigger than the previous ships in our class. We get better economics, but more importantly, it allows us to have more amenities, more luxury amenities on the Regent ship, trying to figure out exactly what our guests are going to enjoy, much larger cabins, larger cabin types. We have, I think, one of the world's largest cabins on Prestige when she comes out, our 2-deck Sky Regent Suite, which is absolutely fantastic. I look forward to sailing in it myself during our christening, but I think that's the only time I could afford it. And on the Oceania brand, especially diving into both entertainment, larger stages, larger venues there, and more importantly, food, because Oceania is by far the best cuisine at sea. It is constantly recognized and gets award for, and we leaned into new restaurants, better restaurants. Even on the Allura, which just launched this last year. And there'll be a lot of Allura in Sonata. Obviously, even though Sonata is going to be a little bit bigger, we introduced this new creperia and gelateria concept where we serve fresh crepes and ice cream with the highest milk fat content, I think, known to man. I think just looking at it, you put on 5 pounds.
Have you added a cardiologist?
Maybe we should do like free cholesterol testing afterwards. It has been an enormous hit. People like those touches. It's not just about excellent meals in the dining room, which of course we provide, but about giving them these additional venues, which they really, really enjoy. I think on the NCL brand, it's a little longer till we can develop that next ship class because we have 6 Prima ships being delivered through 28. But in 2030, we have a new class ship coming out. It's going to be a complete game changer. It is going to be revolutionary in the industry. And my PR people don't let me talk too much about it because it's still 4 years plus into the future, nearly 5 years into the future. But it's going to be game changing. Larger, more amenities, so many more guest experiences. We labored over the general arrangement, the GA, so to speak, for 2.5 years to get everything perfect, just nailing it actually down now. So our builder, our great partner, Fincantieri, can build it. And she's coming out live in mid-2030. So we're very excited for that platform.
Yeah, I know Patrick Dahlgren quite well. I've known him for many years, and he was brilliant as a young captain, and I think he's even better as an executive. I'm sure having him on board and his experience in shipbuilding and ship design has probably helped you a lot too, right?
Yeah, I think Patrick, an outstanding partner to work with. I think he has two great characteristics. One that you mentioned is tremendous experience, having been a captain and worked on the cruise lines where he did get a lot of great experience. But number 2, his spirit. He is the most optimistic dude I have ever known. He's always looking for the bright side, always looking for positive, always looking for what the opportunities ahead, but also super practical about it. There's always 10 to 15 new things he's working on to refine and enhance the guest experience. he's so passionate. We always want to see those guest satisfaction scores, creep up, point at time, and they get to really great numbers, while at the same time having financial discipline, because it's super important. Again, we invest in what our guests value the most, and that allows us to have a win in the guest experience, but also a win in the financial markets, which is important.
Well, thanks for that, Harry. I got a couple of quick observations, but then kind of a follow-up question, if I could. One is I've gone through my first budget process as CEO of CLIA. I found that the approach you described, which was think about what your priorities need to be first, and then let the budget follow,
right,
was absolutely the right approach to rationalize in my own mind, but also to help you, the other executive committee members, think through that. So that's probably a good lesson for anyone with this that's running a business if they haven't already come to that conclusion themselves. I really do appreciate that things have changed. I remember in Bud 1.0 when I was at CLIA the first time around. I remember your predecessor making a comment at the big stage at Sea Trade when there was a buying frenzy going on and the yards were full again, and he was very reticent to take on new debt to recapitalize the fleet, build new ships. That's really changed for you, hasn't it?
No,
You've got a really aggressive order book now.
Yeah, no, absolutely, positively. I think, coming out of COVID, everyone obviously was a little bit nervous because we all took on, more debt than we would have liked. But that's all short term. We're all getting back to where our balance sheets were certainly in the next, 12 to 18 months, if not sooner, compared to where we were in 2019. That's a short-lived thing. Having ships in the fleet is long term, and we always have to focus on the long-term objectives of the company. I think, it's easy to see with only about 7 slots at shipyards to build big ships every year that you need to get your slots in fairly early in the cycle, or you'll simply be locked out. And we can't be in a position where for our core brand NCL, we don't have ships. It's a little bit easier on Oceania region because there are more slots for slightly smaller ships than there are big ships. But if you look worldwide, this industry can only build 7 new ships a year. And we absolutely want to be sure that we have our fair share. So I think we were the first people to have a new build program out to 2036. Carnival followed, and then Royal made their announcement yesterday following as well. But I remember when we did it, I guess it was actually more than a year ago. We certainly were on the vanguard, and that's where we want to be. We are super passionate. You talk about having objectives to set an annual budget. We're super passionate about having 10 and 20-year objectives. Where do we want to be in 10 years from now? We have our deployment mapped out for the next 10 years. We have our new build plan mapped out now through 2045. We've only announced through 2036, but we have our new build program planned out through 2045. And I think that's where we need to be, from a number of perspectives, not only to get the slots at the shipyards, which are super important, but also to build on the infrastructure we have today. How can we innovate? Where do we want to invest? Where does it make the most sense in terms of technology, in terms of even things like headquarters space and things like that support the 10-year deployment and the 20-year new build plan. Port development has become a very important issue. With all the major cruise lines, for the most part, investing significantly in port infrastructure to make sure we deliver great guest experiences. Well, of course, we're not excluded from that. We have developing our private island Great Stirrup Cay. We've made amazing announcements, starting firstly with the pier, but a pool, a welcome center, great activities, a hammock park, and I forget what all the things are, but we have this huge water park, the Great Pipe Water Park, coming in July next year, which we're super excited about, which we think is going to be a game changer. Simply put, we think we are going to have the greatest island in the Caribbean in short order in the next 8 or 9 months. And we're very, very excited. And our guests are excited about it too. We're seeing tremendous booking activity, but that's not where we're ending. We have another island in Belize. We have other port development projects that we're working on. It's super important for us not to just have a great onboard experience, but have a great shoreside experience as well.
So when I'm asked about trends in the industry, private destinations is one I frequently raise, and it's been an interesting evolution for me because I understand where it came from. And it's great to have guest feedback and be able to build out from that. But what I found particularly interesting is you've all taken somewhat different tracks with it. You're all, the large lines anyway, are all making these investments, but they don't all look the same and they're branded differently. Sure. With Ocean Key is a totally different animal than Great Stirrup Key or Celebration Key or the other. It's been interesting to see how there has been differentiation, which I presume reflects the input you got from your guests in the first place. Right?
I think the nice thing about the industry is they're different brands, and different brands cater to slightly different guest demographics. So not that our brand is better or worse than others, but we have slightly different guest demographics than some of the other ones that you mentioned, and we want to build a product that caters to our guest demographic. I think we're one of we have this haven experience on the Norwegian ships, where a significant portion, up to 10% of our cabins and some of our ships, have this ship within a ship concept, with high-end concierge, butler service, private restaurants, private observation decks, and things like that, which really allow for an elevated guest experience with still having access to the rest of the ships, the core entertainment, and the other restaurants on board the ship. And for them, the Silver Cove product that we have, a private cabana product on Great Stirrup Cay makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of families. The water park is going to be great for families. We have a lot of, middle-aged and older couples traveling together, outside of Haven. Well, we'll have private adult-only beach space for them. So really, the island is so large. It's one of the larger islands in the Bahamas that it really allows us to have these different neighborhoods throughout the throughout the island to cater to our core, our 3 or 4 key demographics that go on the NCL brand.
I want to go back to destinations in a moment, but don't want to lose a thought on luxury here that I hadn't. And one is I'm a mariner by nature. I'm a real nautical guy throughout my entire life. I joined the Navy when I was 17 and was an ocean racing sailor before that. That was my passion. But I trust that using the name Prestige in your upcoming ship is a nod to the history of Prestige Cruise Line Holding.
So, yes, to some extent, yes. So for those of you not familiar with the history of this company, this company is comprised of 3 companies that were independent. Norwegian Cruise Line, which was founded back in 1966, and Regent and Oceania, which were founded a little bit later, not quite that storied history. Oceania bought Regent back in, it goes back a while, 2008, I believe. And the combined company was called Prestige Cruise Holdings. So yes, Prestige does give a little bit of a nod to that. We also thought it was a cool name, and our guests like it, and I think it reflects the ultra luxury brand that Regent stands for.
So one more question on that vein before I go back to ports and destinations, if I could, and that is, you described earlier some of the advantages of having a somewhat bigger luxury platform, and to me, it's always been a little challenging to, see how you can make sure that you provide what the guests want, but that level of service can grow with the scale of the bigger ships, while still allowing for those larger public spaces that maybe give you a lot more utility and a lot more options for the guests on board. So I have 2 questions. And one is, have you had much success? I mean, is it a natural progression for your guest profile to move, say, from the ship within a ship haven onto your 2 luxury brands? And then second, do you feel like you found that right balance between where the larger size is, where you can get the benefits you described, while still maintaining that same high level of guest experience, and particularly luxury cruisers are looking for?
So I'll answer the second question first, because on that one, I'm very optimistic and very positive. We really look at every single detail. Although the Sonata and Prestige are a little bit larger than the previous ships within the Oceania and Regent classes, it's only a little bit larger. And we've been very adamant about keeping things like the space ratio, the amount of space per guest, and the crew to guest ratio at even more elevated levels. So even as the ship gets larger, it actually becomes better for the guests. There's more space, there's more crew per guest, if you will. And also more amenities, additional restaurants, additional public venues, additional, places on the sun for guests that like to, on Sunday, excuse me, for guests that like to sit out. So we're really purposeful about not pushing the envelope too much. There's a natural end. I don't see a Regent ship ever getting more than 1,000 passengers. We try to keep the Oceania ship at not more than 1,400 passengers. We think there is a natural end state that if you get too much larger than that, if I got to 2,000 guests on an Oceania ship, don't think you could maintain the experience. It just becomes crowds everywhere. And when someone asks me, illustratively, what's the difference between a luxury product and a contemporary product? I'd say in a contemporary product, guests sometimes have to wait to do an experience. On a luxury product, the staff is waiting for the guest. So, you go to the main atrium or any venue, there's a staff waiting for you, as opposed to you getting on a line behind people. And I know it's a nuanced point, obviously not the only difference between a luxury product and a contemporary product, but it's one that people sometimes can understand. And they say, yeah, that is what makes luxury. That level of service where there's someone waiting for you, ready to cater for you, understands what your needs, can go the extra mile. You don't feel rushed in the interaction. And that's what we look to create on both our Oceania luxury brand and our Regent ultra luxury brand on an even higher scale. In terms of cross-pollination of guests, which was the first part of your question, not as much as I would have liked. I think there absolutely is more room for guests on Haven. We have lots of examples of guests going on Haven, more affluent guests bringing their grandchildren with them, but when they travel without their grandchildren, they go on Oceania and Regent, but not enough. I think we believe there's much more room in cross-brand, getting guests to go from one brand to another than today. And I think you're going to see some exciting announcements coming from us in the next few weeks, meant to address that opportunity, if you will.
No, that's exciting times for sure. Uh, very quick sea story. Uh, when I was in the Coast Guard, we were doing a initial Coast Guard inspection on. At that time, luxury cruising was kind of brand new. This is 1994, and we were in Monaco, of all places. The ship was already in service, so it was easy for us. Everything was working. And I remember I don't like to stay on the ship because when I was a regulator, because the ultimate hammer you have is say, you know what, I'm going back to my hotel. You guys call me when you got this together.
Of course.
So I was reluctant, but we did, and the ship spectacular. And I walked into the suite on, I won't name the brand, but there weren't that many around in 1994. You can figure it out. And I'm looking at this room going, my God, this is just absolutely spectacular. And I noticed they had put a bottle of champagne there to wait for me in my room, and ice, a bucket of ice. And at that point, I used to like drink a little single malt scotch. Don't anymore, but I used to. And at that point, I also made the ill-advised idea that you should put ice in the scotch. So I'm sitting there thinking, should I pull the ice out of the bucket, or should I be a real jerk and call and ask they bring me fresh ice? And I'm standing there having this little dilemma because I did want to have a drink and sit on the balcony and enjoy the moment. The doorbell rings, and there's a butler standing at the door with a bucket of ice.
Trying to reach your mind.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I imagine we'll get to that point eventually. Maybe we're not quite there yet. So if I could go back to destinations.
So, it's interesting you say that. I think some of my colleagues, have been talking about, the use of AI, if you will, to help with things like that. And that's something I'm super passionate about. There's lots of uses of AI. For us, the ultimate use is exactly what you said, knowing the guest well enough. And listen, obviously, on Region and Oceania Fleet, we rely on human beings first, right? Because, we believe that personal touch is important. But to the extent that we can, get that information, obviously, privacy concerns, non-intrusive, but to know that you like or you liked your scotch with ice, like imagine every time you went to a bar and they said, Mr. Darr, can we give you, perhaps you have a preferred brand of scotch that you like, and give you your preferred brand with ice, and whatever type of cup that you like. And every time you went, you were offered that. Well, that's service. I joke when I get to go on the ship, I get that type of service because I'm the CEO of the company. Right. And my challenge to the team was, and I'll take a step back. I was on the Norwegian Joy. I mentioned that to you, but up in Alaska. Yeah. I think I was there the week after you. I had glorious weather. I think you were bad.
Yeah, I took I took
glorious weather, 60s and 70s every day. And the staff treated me fantastically. And how can you get that experience on scale? How can you do, they call it mass personalization. How do we make 4,000 guests on the Norwegian Joy all feel like they're the CEO of the company? How do we give them their preferred drink? How do we know that they have a preferred way that they like their broccoli? And these are silly things, that they like to sit on the right side in the theater. How do we get that type of information on scale so every guest feels like a VIP? Some people like eating breakfast early, some like eating breakfast late, some people like going to the gym, some people don't. And to have that level of knowledge, again, to use it for the guest experience, not to exploit, but to use it to actually improve the guest experience. That's the nirvana. That's the holy grail for us.
Right. Probably with nominal impact on the cost basis of
exactly.
the body, right?
Exactly right. But even if there is some cost impact, that's when I say we want to make investments for things that matter to the guests. That's the type of investment we're prepared to make.
How interesting. So Harry, if I could go back and talk about ports and destinations a little bit. It comes as no secret to you. We've had discussions about many ports around the world where we're having challenges with either, small but very vocal parts of the community, or in some places, real more legitimate mainstream, say, sometimes criticism, sometimes it's commentary and less than that. Sometimes it's a plea for collaboration, so that our not only calls in the port, but also the guests leaving and going into the destination basically right-size the footprint. So you get the right balance between the economic prosperity that can come with cruise business, but not overwhelming the destination or the local population, or maybe in some cases, infrastructure that frankly is being oversold by the locality, not necessarily by us. We've worked through many of those challenges together. How do you see that in the future, and what sort of things have you found to be effective at working through those issues with the local stakeholders and the communities that we want to continue to serve?
Yes, but I'll start out by saying, we are super passionate about sustainability. It's one of the core principles we laid out in our charting the course philosophy, that we continue to run a sustainable cruise line. We're decarbonizing, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but past that, being really good partners with the ports that we visit, the communities that we visit around the world. We're super passionate about contributing to local causes, partnering with local governments, making sure everything we do is in as practical and sustainable way as possible. Taking a step then to the side, we believe that cruise travel is one of the most sustainable ways of tourism in the world. It is certainly a lower footprint, better for local communities than people arriving by private vehicle, which is the number one way that people typically visit communities today. So, I look at the example of Venice, which is probably an extreme example where cruise lines now are banned from. They have this beautiful cruise terminal, on the west side of the island. They invested a lot of money into a people mover system and everything, but no cruise ships visit there today because of some of the backlash with over tourism. And I understand when a 150 or 200,000 ton ship comes into the community, it's a big poster for tourism. But when I looked at the statistics, far more people arrive in Venice by private vehicle and by bus, which is a far less sustainable mode of transportation than arrive by ship. Yet the ships are targeted, perhaps because of their size and their visibility, as opposed to private vehicles and buses, which are, again, far worse for the environment. So, the question you get to, okay, you can complain about it, that's not going to help. The question you get to is, how do you get that message across? How do you tell people that we are willing, we want to be partners? It's important for you that we use buses to move our guests around. It's important to you that we, like our partnership with Dubrovnik, where they said, okay, we want you for a minimum number of hours, but we don't want you there during this time of the day. Or even in places like Alaska, where they say, we love you, but we don't want you coming in early April, right? And we 100% listen every single time to make our product purpose fit for the community we're visiting. Of course, sometimes people don't want to talk to us. They just want to take a cheap political shot, for lack of a better term, at our expense, like in Venice. But in the places where people are really willing to work with us, they will find that we are amazingly agreeable to do what's in the best interest of the local community. I remember, a favorite story of mine was coming out of COVID. The first ship we started up was in Greece. We had our very first cruise. I think it was in June 22, if I'm not mistaken, out of Piraeus. And of course, I had to be there. I was the brand president for NCL at the time, not the CEO of the company, but it was the NCL fleet that was restarted. So I went there with my wife. I think she was a little bit stir crazy after being home for a year and a half anyway. So it was a good excuse to get on an airplane. And I remember, first, like super emotional, like I cried when I saw the ship there with the crew. I boarded a day or two before our guests, and it was amazing. But then I remember visiting these small islands in Greek Isles, and I think one of the islands, I think it was Rhodes, if I'm not mistaken, and we did a little tour, me and my wife with the tour guide. And at the end of the tour, this tour guide just hugged me, and she said, "I can't believe you're back. You don't know what this means for the local community. The lifeline that you guys provide." In terms of tourism dollars and bringing guests and lighting up the community. I mean, it's been super challenging. So, and maybe one of the silver linings of COVID is the world saw what a year and a half with no socialization, with no cross exchange of ideas, with no broadening of minds, with no travel did. And it wasn't necessarily the positive that people thought. When we came back meaningfully and in partnerships with local communities, we think it really, we did it right, and people really appreciated it.
Well, great observations, and certainly a silver lining in every cloud. That COVID cloud was a big one. It's I get asked frequently, did you anticipate this quick and strong of a recovery? So, no, you didn't either, right? No. I mean, it's remarkable what's happened. So I'm excited for the future. Also, you mentioned Venice, and at the same time, essentially cruise ships were be banned from calling there. Still, the tourist numbers went up in Venice.
Yeah,
Right?
It didn't help any, and now we just wind up going to Trieste or Ravenna or one of these other places, which are happy to have us. I mean, Trieste is a perfectly lovely city. I've been there a few times myself, and a beautiful downtown area, right where the ship goes. Great, we're happy to go there.
Culturally, a very different place,
and they're happy to have us.
Great. I want to talk for a moment about regulation and advocacy in general. Obviously, it's a core part of the work that CLIA does on all of your behalf, and then you support us and we facilitate the work you do. I think we'd be ignoring a giant elephant standing in the room. We did talk a little bit about decarbonization. Really, in the past week, there's been a change in the dialogue in the broader shipping community. Now, it's not as if we've seen the major trade associations change their position towards what's happening in IMO. They all want it to continue and get done principally to avoid a balkanization of greenhouse gas regulations everywhere and maybe multiple taxation for the same carbon. But notwithstanding that, we certainly have pointed out things we think need to be rectified with urgency in the proposal that's there now. We've not outwardly opposed it, as some prominent ship owners have within the last week. But they also, if you look at the meta message, it's mostly like ours. That, hey, you need to deal with the life cycle analysis. You need to deal with how the money is going to be managed and spent. But putting all that aside, and just before this happened, the cruise industry and CLIA members, including you as a key leader, put a stake in the ground. So we're going to be to net zero for 2050.
Exactly.
So I know no matter what happens there, you're still moving forward. Could you describe your company's commitment towards continuing on this path?
The decarbonization, I'll just take a step back and say we're committed to a few key principles. One is we will be fully decarbonized by 2050. We are 100% committed. We spend time and resources figuring out different ways to do it, revolving around things like better fuel efficiencies, alternative energy, carbon capture, things along those lines, among other things, but those are probably the three most important things. Even exploring things like nuclear power someday,
workshop on that next month, by the way.
In the mid to distant future. But past that, I think our challenge is not necessarily with regulation, because we're already committed to the decarbonization. I think the challenge is, you talk a little bit about having multiple regulation. So the IMO is going to have a set of rules. EU is going to have a set of rules. Different countries will have a set of rules. You talk about balkanization was the term that you use, but it's a challenge. Like, if EU, IMO, and then China and Brazil and India all have different sets of rules, we have one ship. Like, how do you build a single ship to meet the requirements of multiple jurisdictions, which is why we support the IMO taking a leadership role. The IMO has taken a leadership role in ship safety and other things like that, which has meant that every country doesn't have their own safety rules. And that's been enormously helpful for the industry, and their strict rules and their good rules, and they work. There are very few major ship incidents that happen because of the IMO regulations, both in shipbuilding and in ship operations. We are super supportive. What we're not supportive of, besides multiple rules from multiple countries, is rules that are vague. And our challenge with the current IMO regulations is not that we don't support the end goal, it's that they're extremely vague. So, I don't know what to do with regulations that go out 4 years and then become a TBD. I'm building a new ship now for delivery out through 2036. What am I supposed to do with the delivery in 2036 with rules that sunset in 2032? We'll tell you later what's going to happen after 2032.
30, 40-year life cycle on a modern cruise ship. Right?
At least 30 years.
Yeah.
So, the issue is have a set of rules, have them go out for 20 or 30 years, and then don't change them every 5 minutes. I think there was one victory in this area was, as I know you and I go to speak to the authorities in the EU from time to time. There finally has come a realization that you can't put new sets of rules in every year, because you put new sets of rules in every year, it's simply chaos. So I just want to be clear for the listeners and everyone else, we are 100% committed to sustainability and decarbonization. There's no other alternative as far as we're concerned. It's not a political statement. It's just the way we operate this business. What we're against is multiple sets of rules rules that don't have a long tail to them, and rules that constantly change.
So, Harry, Karen's got a rather long list of questions, and apparently your comments have really resonated with the audience. But before we go there, I want to ask you just a more general question about leadership. And you're a leader not only within your own company, and as you've described your journey. I mean, you've grown organically into this role with the company, but also the association that I lead. I look to you and the other members of the executive committee as leaders, and I know I can call on each of you, and I have you on leadership questions in general, and you've been extremely helpful to me as I continue my own journey. As you look at your leadership experience, what do you think is the legacy that you're going to leave, and is it the legacy you want to leave?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's one that's sometimes hard to answer because you have to self-assess.
I mean, that's a long time down the road.
And then you're asking me to self-assess publicly, but I'll do my best. Listen, I think if I'm the leader that becomes known as creating the right environment in this company for everyone to excel. I talked about a lot of things. One thing I didn't talk about, which is perhaps the thing I'm most passionate about, is people. I want the 40,000 team members that work here, our crew on all of our ships, the team members here in our headquarters and our other offices around the world, to feel that we invest in them, that we care about them, that what they do matters to me, because it does. One of the first things I did when I came on board was we put an employee survey out there to get their feelings, like, do they think they belong? Do they think they have a future? Do they think they're treated well? Are they motivated? Do they believe in the mission of the company? Do they even know what the mission of the company is? And then we run the survey on a regular basis to see how the results progress over time. Even things as mundane but important as, what benefits do they value most? One of the first things, so besides the survey, which is nice in and of itself, but it's only valuable if it leads to action. Was we install, one of the first things I did as CEO is install a cruise benefit that every employee gets a free cruise a year. Now, partially is I want our employees to have good benefits, but I want them to experience the ship. Like, there's no better retention mechanism than taking your spouse and children, or your spouse and parents, whatever your family unit is, significant other, on a ship and experiencing our great product. Like, I came back from my 9-day cruise on the Joy Energize. We have a fantastic product. Obviously the crew get to see it, but I want the crew to see it with their families too. And I want our headquarter people to see our product. We don't run the business out of Miami. We run the business on the 34 platforms that are on the sea. And you can do spreadsheets and look at data when you're here, but you really understand the product when you're on board. So a double benefit on that one. But as everything we're doing around training, development, empowering our people, giving them opportunities, making them feel special and wanted, which they are, super, super passionate about. So if that's where my legacy starts, I'd be thrilled with that. Obviously, you can tell by my comments today that I'm super passionate about product delivery. I'm super passionate about financial discipline, a little bit less exciting in this group, but important as the CEO of a company, and sustainability. I mean, those are, four of our key principles. Let's have great people. Let's empower them and do wonderful things. Let's have a great product. Let's execute great financial results, all underpinned by sustainability. And that's it. I don't want it to be any more complicated than that.
And then in turn, you create a legion of ambassadors out there among your staff, but also provided the guest experience among the guests too, right?
That's what we're trying. I remember also early on in COVID, we did a focus group of guests on board the ship. We were like surprised, like we had full ships, a few weeks after startup, and like part of me it's still in the middle of COVID. Like, why would you go on a cruise? I was just shocked that we would get 3,000-4,000 people on a ship a month after return to service. And I remember I did a focus group with our head of loyalty at the time. 90% of the guests said, "Well, the reason I'm here is my friend told me it's a great vacation, or my parent, or my sibling, or someone I go to church, or some social club with." We think it's our marketing. It's not our marketing. I mean, obviously we need to market it. We need to have a brand. I don't mean to diminish it. But what gets people to come back is exactly what you said. People get off our ship and tell their friends either they had a good time or they had a bad time. If they had a bad time, they're not bringing anyone else with them. If they have a good time, we have a legion of 55,000 people coming off our ship every single week. And if they had a good time, that is the best marketing that we can do.
Well, Harry, before we move on to turn it over to Karen for a couple of questions, I want to thank you, and I also want to thank you for your commitment towards your leadership role with CLIA, but also the positioning of Norwegian Cruise Line Holding within the CLIA community as well, in being leaders and being forthcoming with your thoughts. I've learned a lot from the discussion. Really, truly enjoyed the discussion, and as we continue our work within the entire CLIA community, of which various segments are represented here, I really do want to continue to build this sense of moving together on the things that we can. Obviously, there's commercial things where there's going to be competition. We're not going to be involved in that. But I want to thank you personally for the commitment that you've shown to this point, and also for making yourself available today.
Yeah, but I think Norwegian and the other players, we have loud venues to shout. I don't think CLIA has quite as many loud venues to shout. So I think it's important for people to recognize the great work, and certainly an event like this, the great work that CLIA does. Where you get us to come together and focus, like you say, on things like safety, dealing with various regions in the world, legislation and things like that. You guys really do, you and the team, of course, do an extraordinary job getting us together and focused on these common goals that we work on together. And the industry is certainly a better place because of you and the team.
Well, thanks. We'll continue doing that. Karen, I know you got a long list of questions. Let's take which ones we can here in the remaining 11 minutes or so we have.
Thank you. Before I start with questions, there's been a couple messages that have popped up here. I don't know if you can see the chat, so I'm just going to let you know.
No,
so one is good to learn about the details that help us as our cruise line representatives have good informed conversations with the retail market. Example is when Harry mentioned the comparison of tourist influx to a country between cars, buses, airplanes versus cruise line. We are not the bad guys. So I like that comment.
Karen, I couldn't agree more. And I think that was in response to, Bud's question of how do we communicate better? So I think that's exactly it. And obviously, the grassroots effort that the trade community and our partners can provide in helping amplify that message is invaluable. Right. We're looked at this big bureaucratic or large company, but so many travel partners out there that are so important to local economies. And everything, if they can get behind on that messaging, it would be super important for us as an industry to move our messaging forward.
Exactly. And also those ports and destinations who are here on the call, they know it's important and they have to help us amplify that. And I know our team does a good job working with them. The other was enjoy the leadership, factual and personal anecdotes, because this person's also from, Terry's also from New York. So very, very good. So I'm seeing, there's over 120 people on this call. So it's taking me a moment to see whose hands are raised, but I do have a couple questions. One has to do with AI. All the cruise lines have really started to implement AI. Where was the one moment where you realized AI is going to make you better? Is there something specific that you went, wow?
It's interesting. We all have our own personal lens to look at things. But I remember getting a subscription to ChatGPT, and I started just playing with it, like just asking it the same type of things I would normally ask Google, and it's just such a much better experience. And obviously that's on a really, really small basis. But like if that can do that for me in my personal life, imagine how it is that we could stage that if we put, real time and effort behind it. So, we started playing around, we didn't want to play around with the guest experience. We started playing around with reporting and what type of data that we can feed in to get better reporting without the normal, life cycle of IT. And like to be able to completely redo a report in 20 minutes, as opposed to the weeks it typically took prior. Those are the type of things that really opened my eye, way back a year or so back when this started coming. And now we actually have real major projects that we're working on.
That's great. Everybody tries to keep this low key about what they're doing in AI, but it's such an important tool and we've got to figure out how to use it. Another question, one of the questions that came about is what are you most proud of since you've been in the role of CEO?
It's a question similar to the last question that Bud asked me about, what I want my legacy or with some version of that. It's really that the people working here, the core of our product is our people delivering experiences to our guests, that we have seen meaningful shift to people being happier with being here, believing there's opportunities, believing in the company's mission. That's the thing I'm proudest of. I don't want to be in an organization where people don't want to come to work, where they're doing it because they can't get a job somewhere else. That's not the type of boss I want to be. I want to work in a place where people are happy to be here. Now, I'm not going to say we have 100% satisfaction in our employee base. That's impossible, but it is meaningfully better than it was when I started. And it's probably the thing I probably spend more time on people with our head of people excellence, Lynn White, than I do on product. That's how important it is to me.
I so appreciate that. Another question is, what's the most important lesson you learned as a CEO that you wish you had known earlier before you took on the role as a CEO?
It's funny. In preparing to be the CEO of the company, it was I was competing for this job with a couple of internal and one or two external candidates, and the role of our HR department, or we now call it people excellence, was to make each of us the best possible candidate. So they put a plan together for me where I went to what could best be described as CEO school, and I got to talk to a bunch of business leaders. And this doesn't answer your question directly, because I actually got this piece of advice before I was the CEO, but they put me in contact with this guy, Ed Breen, who was the CEO of DuPont. Or he had been the CEO of DuPont. I think he's retired now, but he had been the CEO of DuPont for many, many years. And I started picking his brain about what are the important lessons of being a CEO. And he says, and it was a really good conversation. But the one thing that stood out was he said, Harry, I've been the president of DuPont for 20 years, or it was a really long time. He goes, in my entire career, I've made 5 important decisions. 5. And I go, how's that possible? He goes, think back about anyone's legacy, how many really important decisions. He goes, don't let yourself get bogged down so much in the details that you don't make those 5 important decisions. And I think about that every day. Obviously, we're all in a myriad of meetings or doing things like this, right, that keep our hours busy, but we need time to think about big ideas and big things, and at least have 1 or 2 medium-sized things that we do a year that really will move the business forward. And hopefully in a career, I don't think I'll be the CEO for 20 years. I didn't start early enough to do that. But if I make it for 10 years, hopefully I'll be able to look back and say, I did. My legacy is we had these 5 important things that we did as a company that set the next CEO up for success.
That's great. And you look forward to that. We've had a lot of feedback that the culture, you've built a really strong, positive company culture. Is there anything you changed once you came in as CEO to build upon that great culture you have?
No, absolutely. Listen, it wasn't that our culture before was bad, and I'm not here to say anything about the previous CEO, of course. But listen, this starting with putting people at the center of what we do, in the same way we put guests at the center of what we do on board our ships. But encouraging the spirit of collaboration, breaking down walls, breaking down silos, getting the senior leadership team and the next level underneath them to talk on a regular basis and develop real plans to move the business forward, whether it's for people, for product, for brands, the key things that drives the business forward. I'm super passionate about. Things didn't change overnight, but we're sitting here now about 2.5 years into my tenure, and it's a probably different company than it was back then.
And we've heard that too. I've heard that from our partners and also some of our other members. So that's great. I'm going to lead with one final question to wrap that series up, and then we're going to say goodbye to everybody. We're very punctual here at CLIA, as I know you are too.
Thank you, Karen.
We are now.
You all have other meetings.
Old habits die hard for me.
So what's one operational practice or innovation that NCLH that you think other organizations could benefit from adopting? An operational practice.
I think, this concept of starting with large objectives, and we talked a little bit about it, early on in our conversation, develop your objectives before you develop your budgets, right? And then track along the objectives. But it has to be a small but meaningful number. Like I remember when I first started, okay, what are everyone's objectives? And there's this list of 73 things. We're not going to do 73 things. Certainly not, we're not going to do 73 big things. So figure out what your strategy is, figure out what your core 7 to 10 objectives are, and then build resources, build your budget, build your people resources to support those key 7 to 10 things. And I think that applies to an organization of any size.
Well, and I agree, and I think Bud is taking us in that direction too, when I saw the plan for this year.
I think he is too. We just had our quarterly CLIA board meeting, I think on Monday. And exactly what he did. He laid out, these are the six or 8 key things that we want to do in 2026. And this is how our budget supports it. So absolutely, positively, but is a great leader.
Bud is a great leader. We're thrilled to have him, and we're thrilled to have you leading NCLH, because you have grown so much and expanded. Someday I'll give you my personal story about your cruise line. It was very special. But I want to close this up by thanking you and thanking Bud for giving us this hour of your time. And I also want to thank our audience. We really appreciate our partners and what they do for our business. And we want to do more of these types of meetings for our most elite partners who are the biggest supporters of us. So I want to thank you. There will be a survey coming out. We want you to click on the list afterwards and give us some feedback. And we hope to do a couple more of these over the next few months with you, Bud, and a few of our other CEOs. But this was the perfect start. Thank you, Harry, so much. And thank you, Bud. And I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else on this call.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.